The loudspeaker had been screaming, "Evacuate," for 40 seconds when Staff Sergeant Elena Voss looked at 29 military dogs and watched every single one of them turn toward the fire. Not away from it, toward it. The flames were already 50 feet high. The heat was bending the air itself. Colonel Dane's voice was still cutting across every radio channel on the base. "All units stand down. Do not enter that perimeter. That is a direct order." Elena looked at Max. Max looked at the fire. Then he took his first step forward, and 28 dogs followed without a sound. She followed them. If you've never seen 29 dogs defy a direct military order to run into a burning building, stay with this story until the very end. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss what we share here. And drop a comment right now telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning had started the way most mornings at Camp Pendleton started, with someone in authority reminding Elena Voss in some indirect and entirely deniable way that she didn't quite belong. It came from Colonel Richard Dane himself this time, which was unusual. He normally delegated that particular task to subordinates, but he was in a generous mood at the 0730 briefing, expansive and relaxed in the way that men with unchallenged power often are, and he let it slip out almost casually, the way a man drops something he never intended to hold carefully in the first place. "I want to see readiness numbers from every unit by end of week," he said, scanning the room. "Combat qualified units first. Then we'll work down through support logistics." He paused just long enough to be intentional, and animal management. He didn't look at Elena when he said it. He didn't have to. Captain Leo Ferris, seated 2 chairs to Dane's left, did look at her. His expression said, "I'm sorry," in the way that people express apology when they have no intention of doing anything about the source of it. Elena returned his gaze for exactly 1 second and then looked back at her notepad. She wrote nothing. There was nothing to write. She'd heard variations of animal management for 14 months, ever since she'd arrived at Pendleton, carrying a reassignment order that no one had asked for, in a file that contained 3 years of outstanding performance reviews, followed by a single notation that read, "Recommend non-deployment pending psychological review." The psychological review had cleared her 8 months later. Nobody had updated the file. Dane had never mentioned it directly. He didn't need to. She walked out of the briefing at 0749, crossed the Central Road, and went back to the only place on this base where the air felt honest. The K9 compound. 29 dogs. That was what she had built quietly over 11 months in the hours between what was assigned and what was required. The 22 active military working dogs, Belgian Malinois German Shepherds, one Dutch Shepherd named Cargo, who had a gift for structural search that bordered on the supernatural, were assigned to her unit officially. The other 7 were holdovers, decorated animals whose handlers had been killed in deployment or medically discharged without the ability to take their dogs home. Nobody had wanted them. They were older, some of them, and the system didn't know what to do with working dogs once the person who trained them was gone. Elena had filed the request herself. 7 requests over 4 months, each one more detailed than the last, each one citing specific behavioral assessments in medical records and training histories. She'd gotten all 7 approved one by one from different administrators who didn't talk to each other enough to realize what she was assembling. She'd never filed the paperwork to formalize them as a joint unit. She knew what would happen if she did. Dane would dissolve it. He wouldn't give a reason. He wouldn't need one. She was animal management. Max was the oldest. 9 years old, which was elderly for a working Belgian Malinois, and which explained why his third handler had put in the medical discharge request rather than bring him home. Elena had read the request. The handler hadn't wanted to discharge him. He'd been told to. She never found out by whom. Max had arrived at Pendleton on a Tuesday 7 months ago in a transport crate with a card attached that listed his name, his breed, his date of birth, and his service record. The service record was 4 pages long. She'd read all 4 pages standing in the receiving bay in January, with her breath misting in the cold, and when she was done, she'd set the card down on top of his crate and said very quietly, "I know." She didn't know if he understood the words. She knew he understood the tone. He'd pressed his nose against the crate door and held it there. Sire. By 0830, the training rotation was running. Elena moved through the compound the way she always did, not supervising, exactly more like participating in something she happened to be qualified to lead. Sergeant First Class Hector Meade, her senior handler, was running the detection drill with a cluster of 6 dogs near the eastern fence. Specialist Dana Cho was working 2 of the younger shepherds on obedience, sequencing her voice patient and consistent in the way that good handlers develop after years of understanding that repetition is not failure, it's just teaching. Elena was working Max on something that wasn't in any official training curriculum, had no official name. She developed it herself in the years before Pendleton in a unit that no longer officially existed. She called it pattern reading. The idea was simple and the execution was brutally difficult. She would create a situation with multiple variables, a simulated structure, multiple hidden objects, unpredictable, sound, and then deliberately give Max no command. Nothing. She would stand at the edge and watch what he decided. Most trainers never did this. The philosophy of military dog handling was built on command and compliance. Dog receives instruction, dog executes instruction, clean, predictable, combat reliable. Elena believed all of that. She taught all of that. She also believed there was something beyond it, something that existed in the space between the command and the execution, and she'd spent years trying to understand what lived there. Max always surprised her. Not because he got it wrong, because he consistently got it more right than she expected. "He's doing the thing again," Hector said, coming to stand beside her own. He was watching Max move through the simulated structure with a kind of quiet bewilderment that Elena had learned to recognize as professional respect. "The thing where I have no idea how he knows what he knows." "He reads the whole picture," Elena said, "not just what we point him at. We teach them to read what we point at." "I know," she paused. "That's the problem." At 09:14, the fuel depot at the eastern edge of Camp Pendleton detonated. Elena felt it before she heard it, a pressure shift in the air, a fraction of a second of total stillness, like the world taking a breath. Then the sound hit, and the heat followed the sound, and the sky to the east turned a color that had no name in any language she knew. The explosion was not small. She'd heard explosions in Fallujah and Kandahar, in a mountain pass in eastern Afghanistan, whose coordinates she still saw sometimes when she closed her eyes, and this one ranked with the worst of them. 3 fuel tanks, she'd learned later. The rupture in one had ignited the others in sequence, which was why the column of fire reached the height it did, why the secondary blast came 11 seconds after the first, why windows in buildings 400 meters away failed simultaneously. The base emergency system activated. Every loudspeaker on the installation simultaneously, "All personnel, this is an emergency. Evacuate the eastern sector immediately. This is not a drill. Evacuate immediately." Elena was already moving the hands, going to the emergency protocol. She ran automatically, shutting connection points, securing equipment, beginning the standard evacuation procedure for the compound. Around her, handlers were reacting exactly as trained, calm, fast, focused on the animals. Except the animals weren't behaving the way animals behave in a disaster. She noticed it first in Max. He had stopped the moment the explosion sound had gone, completely still, and then oriented not toward the evacuation route, not toward Elena, but directly east, toward the fire. His nose was working in that deep, rapid way that she associated with high-value detection, the gear shift she'd seen him make in Fallujah when he'd found something that wasn't supposed to be there. Then she noticed the others. All 29 of them had stopped. Different locations in the compound, different training states, different handlers, but every single dog had oriented in the same direction toward the same point east of the fire perimeter with the same expression of absolute locked attention. "What is that?" Hector said very quietly from beside her. "I don't know yet." Elena didn't take her eyes off Max. "Give them a moment." "The evac. Give them a moment, Hector." Deshab. Colonel Dane's voice came across the emergency channel with the authority of a man who had never questioned whether his authority was legitimate. "All units, this is Colonel Dane. Evacuate to designated safety zones immediately. Fire suppression teams are deploying to the eastern sector. Do not repeat, do not attempt individual rescue operations. Authorized response teams only. This is a direct order." 20 seconds later, a second voice cut through on the emergency frequency. "Male strain fighting to keep panic below the surface and not quite winning. This is Section Chief Daniel Rourke, Warehouse 7 Contractor Logistics. I have 47 personnel trapped inside this structure. Main exit is compromised by debris from the initial blast. Secondary exit is blocked by fire spread on the southern wall. I have injured personnel and I need immediate assistance. Please, somebody, we cannot get out. Elena heard the number and felt it land in her chest like something physical. 47. She looked at Max. Max looked at the fire. His body was coiled with a tension she recognized from a building in Fallujah, from a night she was not supposed to talk about, from the last time a unit she loved had stood at the edge of something terrible, and she had understood with a clarity that bypassed thought entirely exactly what had to happen next. Sergeant Voss. The voice came from behind her. Lieutenant Priya Nair, base physician, crossing the compound, at something between a walk and a run, Red Cross on her shoulder, medical bag in her hand, expression of someone who has already done the calculation and didn't like the result. The evacuation route is clear on the north side. We need to move these animals now. I know. Elena didn't move. Priya slowed. The warehouse is inside the fire perimeter. You understand that? I understand that. Dane's order is, I heard the order. Priya went quiet. She was watching the dogs. They're not afraid, she said. No, Elena said. They're not. How is that possible? Elena looked at her for one moment, long enough for Priya to understand that the answer was not simple and that this was not the time for it. Do you have surgical capability in that bag? Basic trauma, enough to stabilize. Are you willing to move? Priya looked at the fire perimeter, looked at the 29 dogs, looked back at Elena. Nobody's authorized this. No, Elena agreed. They haven't. A pause, brief. I'm willing to move, Priya said. Come on. Max took his first step east at 0921. He didn't wait for a command. He didn't look back at Elena for confirmation. He simply moved with the specific deliberateness of an animal that has made a decision based on information it cannot communicate and doesn't need to. The dogs on his immediate left and right stepped with him. Then the next group, then the next. Elena fell into step alongside him. Hector grabbed your arm. Sergeant, I can't authorize this. You know I can't. I'm not asking you to. She kept moving. Get the rest of the team to the evac point. Make sure every dog is accounted for. I can't let you, Hector. She stopped, turned to look at him directly, and something in her face made him stop arguing mid-breath. Get them out safe. I'll handle this. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he released her arm. Don't die out there, he said. That's not on today's schedule, she said, and turned back east. The fire perimeter was not a clear line. It was heat and smoke, and the structural remains of 2 outbuildings that had taken the brunt of the secondary blast, and moving through it required the kind of sustained focus that blanks out everything except the immediate problem. Elena moved with her arm over her nose and mouth, her eyes tracking Max, trusting his route, because he'd read something she hadn't. He led them left of the obvious path, away from the direct approach to Warehouse 7, which was also, she realized 10 seconds later, the direction from which a new wall of flame was expanding as a third fuel rupture fed the main fire. He'd known that before she could have calculated it. She didn't know how. She filed it for later. Priya was moving behind her, not speaking, not stumbling, keeping pace with a kind of disciplined efficiency that Elena recognized as military trained, even though Priya wore a medical insignia. The dogs divided before Elena signaled anything. Max and 8 others continued toward Warehouse 7's eastern face. 12 peeled left toward a secondary structure where black smoke was densest. The remaining 9 spread into a perimeter configuration, checking angles, returning. Moving out again in a pattern she recognized from exercises she had run in another unit in another life that officially no longer existed. The pattern was called Ghost Sweep. She had developed it herself in Iron Pack in 2019. She had never taught it to any of these dogs individually. She had never run it in this compound. She stopped walking. Her heart was doing something she couldn't name. Elena. Priya at her shoulder, voice low. What is it? Elena couldn't answer yet, because the only explanation she could reach, the only one that fit, was that the 7 holdover dogs, the ones who had come to Pendleton with their service histories and their 4-page records and their previous handlers who were gone, one or more of them had been in Iron Pack. One or more of them had learned Ghost Sweep from someone who'd learned it from her, which meant Iron Pack's dogs hadn't all been reassigned to breeding programs and private handlers and quiet retirement the way the disbandment orders claimed. Someone had scattered them, hidden them inside the system. And then 14 months ago, someone had sent 7 of them to her. Priya grabbed her sleeve. People. Warehouse 7, East Wall Loading Bay. And Elena shut the thought down, locked it somewhere she could return to, and ran. The loading bay doors had been buckled inward by the blast pressure, which meant they couldn't be opened from outside and couldn't be forced from inside, but it also meant there was a gap 18 inches of warped metal that Max had identified before any human eye reached it. He went through first, not because Elena sent him, because it was the right sequence and he knew it. She heard voices on the other side, coughing. Someone saying, "Oh, thank God," in the tone of a person who had stopped believing that phrase meant anything and just rediscovered that it did. "Rourke," Elena called through the gap. "Section Chief Rourke." "Here," a man's voice tight with the effort of keeping it level. "I'm here. There are 47 of us. 11 can walk. The rest are, oh, how many critical? 4, maybe 5. "Priya." Elena stepped back. Priya was already moving medical bag open, reading the gap the way a surgeon reads a problem. What's possible, what's required, what order things have to happen. "Get the walking ones out first," Priya said. "I'll triage through the gap, tell you who moves next." "Can you reach them?" "I can reach enough." She was already on her knees. "Go help Max." What happened over the next 22 minutes would be described later by every person who witnessed it in terms that the witnesses themselves acknowledged as sounded impossible. 3 people would say the word impossible in their official statements, then correct themselves, then leave the word in anyway because no other word fit what they'd seen. Max and his 8 dogs worked the interior of Warehouse 7 with a precision that had no training precedent in Camp Pendleton's records because it hadn't come from Camp Pendleton's training. They located 11 people in the loading bay, the walking wounded as Rourke had described them, and moved them toward the gap efficiently and without incident. They located 9 more in a smoke-heavy corridor that ran the length of the building's north wall, a section Elena had not known existed from the external approach. They found 3 more in an equipment room that had partially collapsed, separated from the main group who had stopped responding to shouts, because the smoke in that section had reached a concentration that made coherent response physiologically impossible. One of the younger Malinois, a 3-year-old named Tuck, who had been the most uncertain of the 22 active dogs, who had given Elena more training difficulty than any animal in the compound, located all 3 of them by scent through a sealed interior door and barked until Elena opened it. "Good boy," she said, and she meant it with her whole chest. Tuck was already going back in. Outside the perimeter, the situation had changed. The security camera footage, which Dane's staff was monitoring in the command center, had begun showing something that nobody in that room had a framework to process. The footage showed Elena Voss and an unidentified woman in a medical uniform moving through the fire perimeter with 29 military dogs, and it showed those dogs conducting what appeared to be a coordinated extraction operation without visible commands, without handlers directing individual actions, without the chaos that every training doctrine said would occur when animals were exposed to this scale of fire. Captain Ferris watched the footage for 90 seconds without speaking. Then he said very quietly to no one in particular, "What are we looking at?" "That's Voss," someone confirmed. "I know who it is. I'm asking what that," Ferris gestured at the screen at the wall was moving in formation at the organized sequence of people emerging from the building, "is." No one answered because no one had an answer. Dane entered the command center at 09:37, 16 minutes after Elena had entered the perimeter. He watched the screen for exactly 5 seconds. "Get me MPS at the eastern perimeter. Sergeant Voss is in direct violation of a lawful order. I want her in custody the moment she exits that zone." Ferris turned. "Sir, she's currently—" "I heard what she's currently doing, Captain. I also heard my order. Execute it." Jan. Elena came through the loading bay gap for the 4th time at 09:39, helping a man with a broken arm and a badly burned shoulder navigate the 18-inch opening without putting weight on either injury. He was the 31st person out. He was not the last. 16 remained inside. The deepest section of the building, the section Rourke hadn't mentioned because Rourke hadn't known it was there, had been identified by 3 of Max's group through a sealed fire door at the building's far end. Rourke, once out and treated by Priya, had gone white when Elena described the door. "That's a sub-level access," he said. "It's listed as decommissioned on the base map. Hasn't been in active use for 2 years. Then why are there people in it?" "There was a civilian tour this morning," he said, and his voice broke just slightly on the word civilian. "A base orientation for contractor families. 4 children. I didn't know they'd gone down there. I didn't know anyone had." Elena had already turned back to the building. "Voss," Priya's hand on her arm, "the roof on the east side is degrading. You have minutes, maybe less." "I know. The MPs are staging at the perimeter." "I know that too." Priya's grip tightened. Not to stop her. Something else. "Warren Solis, one of the men we just brought out, burns on his arm's brown jacket. He said something when I was treating him. He said," she lowered her voice even though there was no one close enough to hear. "He said to tell you that Fallujah wasn't an accident. He said he was there. He said he has proof." Elena's body went absolutely still. 3 years. 3 years of carrying something she couldn't prove, of knowing what had happened, and having nothing that could make anyone believe her, of being transferred and reviewed, and quietly managed by a system that worked very hard to ensure she remained isolated from anyone who might listen. "He was there. He has proof." "Where is he?" she said. "Priya put him in the triage area north side outside the perimeter. He's stable. Don't let him out of your sight." "Elena!" "The children first," Elena said. "Fan. Everything else second." She looked at Max, who had reappeared at her side, without being called the way he always did when she was about to do something that required trust. "You with me?" Max pressed the side of his head against her leg, once firm. "Okay," she said. "Let's go get them." She moved back into the building, Max at her side, the roof beginning to creak above them, in the language of structures that are telling you their patience has limits, and somewhere behind her, 28 dogs held the perimeter, held the route, held the line between the people who'd already gotten out and the people still waiting to. The fire pressed in from 3 sides. The dogs didn't move. The sub-level access door was not on any map Elena had been given, which meant it was not on any map the fire suppression teams were working from, which meant that if she didn't find the people inside it in the next several minutes, nobody would know to look until it was too late to matter. Max found the door in 40 seconds. It was set into the north interior wall behind a collapsed shelving unit that had come down in the first blast, and it was the kind of door that institutional buildings put in places they'd rather not think about. Heavy steel. No window, a latch handle instead of a knob designed to be forgotten. Max stood in front of it and barked twice. Short, sharp, the specific bark Elena had learned to read as here, not maybe here. She got the shelving unit off the door in pieces, pulling sections with both hands, ignoring the heat on the metal, ignoring the ceiling above her that was making sounds she didn't like. When the latch was clear, she pulled it open, and the smoke that rolled out was thick enough to press against her like something solid. "Hello?" Her voice was as level as she could make it. "Can anyone hear me?" Coughing. Then a child's voice, very small, very frightened, from somewhere below. "We're here. We're down here. Please." Max was already through the door. The sub-level was accessed by a concrete staircase, 9 steps wide enough for 2 people. At the bottom, there was a storage room with a low ceiling and no ventilation, which explained the smoke concentration, and in that room there were 16 people, 12 adults and 4 children, who had been sitting in complete darkness for 23 minutes because the lights had failed in the first blast, and no one had come, and after a while the darkness starts to feel like an answer to a question you didn't want to ask. The children were between 7 and 11 years old. Elena learned this later. In the moment in the dark and the smoke, they were just small shapes that Max was moving toward, and small voices that needed to hear something true before they could move. "My name is Elena," she said into the dark. "I have a dog named Max. He's going to stay right next to you the whole way up those stairs, okay? He's done this before. You can hold his back if you need to." She paused. "Does anyone need to hold his back?" 4 small voices said yes at almost the same moment. Something happened in her chest that she didn't have time for. She filed it with everything else. "Okay," she said, "then let's go." Getting 16 people up 9 stairs and through a burning building with 4 children who were frightened and two adults who couldn't walk unassisted, and a ceiling that was communicating its structural intentions in increasingly clear language, took 11 minutes and required every calculation Elena had. Max worked the children with a patience and precision that she had no training explanation for. He didn't herd them. He didn't push. He positioned himself so that each child had his flank within reach, and he moved at their pace instead of pulling them towards speed. And when the youngest one, a girl 7 years old who would tell her mother later that the dog had looked at her like he already knew her, stopped on the stairs because the smoke was too thick and the fear was too large, Max stopped too. He pressed his head gently against her shoulder, held it there. She put her hand on his neck and kept climbing. Elena was at the top directing the adults when she heard the ceiling give its first serious warning, the deep, resonant creak that traveled through the structure the way sound travels through bone. Not a surface sound, a structural sound. Faster, she said. Not loud, not panicked. The tone she'd learned in Afghanistan, the one that communicated urgency without terror, because terror in a confined space with frightened people is its own kind of disaster. Everyone needs to move faster right now. They moved faster. She counted them out through the fire door, back into the main warehouse space, passing them to Tuck and two other dogs who materialized from the smoke and guided them toward the loading bay. 13, 14, 15. The man who came out 15th was bleeding from a head wound that had been inadequately dressed, and he grabbed Elena's arm as he passed and said, in a voice that had the careful precision of someone trying to be understood through significant pain, "The woman behind me, Sarah, she can't put weight on her left leg. She needs—" "I have her," Elena said. "Go." Sarah was the last one out of the sub-level, hobbling on one leg, with her arm across Elena's shoulders, and they moved through the main warehouse space in a half-run that felt nothing like running and exactly like desperation. The ceiling above the east section came down 30 feet to their right while they were still in the building. Not a collapse, not yet, but a section of roofing material and insulation and whatever had been stored above it, coming down in a cascade of heat and debris that sent a pressure wave sideways through the air. Elena pulled Sarah into her side and kept moving. The loading bay gap was ahead. Max came through it first from outside, appearing in the opening, like something Elena had specifically requested from a universe that didn't usually take requests. He barked once. She understood, keep coming. She got Sarah through the gap with 3 seconds of maneuvering that would leave bruises on both of them, and she would never once mention it. Then she came through herself, and the Californian air hit her face, and she took one breath that was the best breath she'd ever taken in her life. And then she started moving again, because there were people who needed Priya, and Priya was north, and she had to count. 47. She needed 47. She counted while she moved. 12 from the loading bay, 9 from the north corridor, 3 from the equipment room, 16 from the sublevel, 40. Then she ran her memory back through the exits and found the other 7 in the triage area. People who had made it out through the gap before she'd entered the sublevel. 47. She stopped. Counted again. 47. Max, she said. He was at her side close enough to touch. She put her hand on his head for exactly 2 seconds. That was all she had time for. Good, she said. That was very good. He leaned into her hand the way he always did. Then he straightened and looked east, because even now, even after all of that, he was still reading the picture. The military police were waiting at the perimeter edge, 2 of them in full uniform, professional and uncomfortable in the specific way that people are uncomfortable when they've been ordered to do something that doesn't feel right, and they're going to do it anyway. Sergeant Voss, the senior MP said. His name tag read Kellerman. He looked at the 47 people being triaged behind her and at the 29 dogs that had formed a loose perimeter around the triage area and at the burned building she'd just walked out of, and his expression did something complicated. I have orders to take you into custody. I know, Elena said. Whose orders? Colonel Dane. Charge, on insubordination, unauthorized entry into a restricted zone, willful disregard of a commanding officer's lawful. I understand the charges. She held out her wrists, not in defiance, just because she understood how this worked, and she was not going to make it harder for a man who was doing his job. Can I see my physician first? I need to confirm patient status. Kellerman looked at her wrists, looked at her face, at the soot and the burns on her forearms from where she'd been too close to the cascade, looked at the 47 people. looked back at her. Make it quick, he said. He did not move to cuff her. She found Priya in the triage area, moving between patients with the focused economy of a surgeon in a field hospital. Priya looked up when Elena reached her, and whatever she saw in Elena's face made her stand up straighter. All 47, Elena said. All 47, Priya confirmed. Too critical, but stable. Nobody is dying today. She paused. I need to tell you something about Warren Solis. Tell me. He's not a contractor, not just a contractor. Priya's voice dropped below the ambient noise of the triage area, the voices, the radio traffic, the distant sound of fire suppression equipment. He was Army, military intelligence. He retired 2 years ago and went into private contracting, but he was Army before that. And before that, she stopped. Say it, Elena said. He was deployed to Fallujah in 2019. He says he was attached to a joint task force that was running parallel to your unit. He says he saw what happened. All of it. Priya held her gaze. He says he tried to report it and was told his memory of the operation was incorrect, that his access to the relevant mission files was classified above his clearance, that if he continued to pursue the matter, he would be reassigned to a post he specifically did not want. Where is he? Priya pointed. Warren Solis was sitting on the ground against the north wall, both arms dressed in field bandages, gray-faced and alert, in the way of someone who is managing significant pain by focusing on something more important than the pain. He was approximately 50 years old, Elena assessed, with the kind of stillness that came from military training and the kind of eyes that came from carrying something heavy for a long time. He saw her coming and didn't look away. You're Voss, he said. I am. You look exactly like the description. He paused. How many did you get out? All of them. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, something closer to confirmation, like he'd expected this and was glad the expectation had been met. Of course you did, he said quietly. Then, we need to talk about Fallujah. Not yet. Elena crouched to his level. How much documentation do you have? Enough. I've been carrying it for 3 years, not here, not anywhere they can access it, but I can get it into the right hands within 24 hours. He looked past her at the fire still burning beyond the perimeter. I wasn't supposed to be on that tour this morning. I came to Pendleton to find you. The warehouse was... He let out a slow breath. An unplanned addition to my itinerary. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Why now? Why come forward now? Because Dane is being considered for promotion to Brigadier General, Solis said. The recommendation went to the Secretary of Defense's office last month. If that goes through, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elena stood up. The MPs were still at the perimeter edge, Kellerman watching her with the patient attention of a man who had agreed to give her time and intended to keep that agreement. She looked at Priya. Get his statement recorded, not written. Recorded with your name attached as witness. Get it to the JAG office directly, not through the chain of command. Can you do that? I can do that right now, Priya said. Then do it right now. She walked back to Kellerman and held out her wrists. He looked at them for 3 seconds. Then he said very quietly, the colonel wants you in the command center. I know. For what it's worth, Sergeant. He stopped himself. It's worth something, she said, even if you don't say it. He nodded once, and they walked. The command center was the kind of room that existed to make people feel the weight of authority. Large screens, radio banks, people at stations doing things that conveyed competence and order. It had been designed to communicate that someone was in control of a situation, and it worked reasonably well, except when the situation on the screens directly contradicted the control being performed around them. The screens were showing the footage. All of it, every camera angle, the loading bay, the sub-level door, the children coming up the stairs with their hands on Max's back, the roof coming down while Elena was still inside. Someone in the room had compiled it into a continuous feed, which meant someone in the room had been watching it happen in real time, which meant the order to arrest her had been given while the footage was running. She noticed that first. She noticed Captain Ferris noticed that she'd noticed it. Dane was standing at the central console with his back to the door when she entered. He turned when he heard her, and his expression was one she recognized, not anger exactly. Something colder, the expression of a man doing a calculation. Sergeant Voss, he said. Colonel. You were given a direct order to evacuate. I was. She didn't elaborate. You entered a restricted zone during an act of emergency. You put yourself in a position and 29 military animals at risk without authorization and in direct violation of. 47 people are alive, Elena said. Sir. The room went very quiet. Dane let the quiet sit for a moment. Then that's not the point. Then I'd be interested to understand what the point is. Her voice was steady, not challenging. Genuinely, even the way her voice got when she'd moved past the possibility of fear into something clearer on the other side. Because from where I was standing, the authorized response teams were 8 minutes from deployment. Warehouse 7's east roof came down 11 minutes after we entered the building. The math on that, sir, is not favorable to the people inside. You don't make that calculation. I make that calculation. You made a different one, she said. That's the issue. Something moved across Dane's face. Fast control gone in less than a second, but she'd been watching for it and she saw it. Ferris spoke from the side of the room. Sir, the footage has already been accessed by base media relations. There's a news helicopter that was covering the wildfire. They've been on station for the last 40 minutes. Their footage is going to be on the evening news regardless of what we do here. Dane didn't look at Ferris. He kept his eyes on Elena. You are confined to quarters pending a formal review of today's events. Your K-9 unit is suspended from active training operations. The animals will be relocated to number. The word came out of Elena before the conscious decision to say it had fully formed. Quiet, absolute. Dane stopped. The dogs stay in the compound, as she said. They're not being relocated. That's not a request you're in a position to make. I'm making it anyway. She held his gaze. Sir, I'd strongly recommend that before any further decisions are made about my unit or my animals, you speak to the Base J AG officer. She paused. Let the pause carry exactly as much weight as she intended. There are some procedural matters that have come to light today that are going to require legal guidance before this situation is resolved. The calculation in Dane's expression shifted. She watched it happen. He was good at managing information she'd grant him, that he processed the implication in under 2 seconds and arrived at approximately the right conclusion about what she was telling him without having the specifics. And the arrival at that conclusion did something to his posture that he couldn't quite control. He was afraid. Not of her, of what she knew, or what she was implying she knew, which meant the thing she'd been told was real enough that he recognized it without being told what it was. Sergeant Voss, Ferris said very carefully, the colonel has ordered you confined to quarters. I think at this time we should all, Captain. Dane's voice was sharp. I didn't ask for your editorial. No, sir, Ferris said. And then after a beat that was precisely 1 beat longer than protocol required, I apologize. He met Elena's eyes as he said it, and she understood that the apology was not for her. She was escorted to her quarters by a single MP, not Kellerman, someone younger who didn't speak and seemed grateful for the opportunity not to. The compound was outside her quarters building, and when they walked past it, she could see the dogs through the fence. All 29 settled in the shade of the training structure, the way they settled at the end of a long operational day, not collapsed, not chaotic, but specifically at rest. The rest of animals that have done what they came to do. Max was at the fence. He'd known she was coming before she rounded the corner. She didn't question how anymore. She stopped at the fence for 30 seconds. The MP didn't rush her. Good work today, she said quietly. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close to enough. She said it anyway because it was true, and he deserved to hear it. Max pressed his nose through the chain link. She put her fingers against it. I know, she said. Me too. The call came to her quarters at 1847, which was 4 hours and 26 minutes after she'd been confined, and it came from an extension she didn't recognize, which was unusual, because she knew every extension on this base by its 3-digit prefix. She answered it. Sergeant Voss, a woman's voice, senior clipped with the particular economy of someone who has spent decades speaking to people who needed to hear things quickly. My name is Director Carolyn Webb. I'm with the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. We've been monitoring a situation at Camp Pendleton today. Elena said nothing. She waited. We became aware of certain developments approximately 2 hours ago. Webb continued, I'm not going to ask you questions over this line. I am going to tell you that the statement given by Warren Solis to Lieutenant Nair has been received and is being evaluated. I'm also going to tell you that footage of today's incident has reached personnel at a level of authority above Colonel Dane's chain of command, and that footage is generating questions that will need to be answered. What kind of questions? Elena said. The kind that relate to how 29 dogs with no formal joint unit designation conducted a coordinated search and extraction operation consistent with the classified tactical protocols that were officially dissolved in 2021. Elena sat down on the edge of her bunk, slowly. You know about Iron Pack, she said. We know about Iron Pack, Webb said. We have known about Iron Pack for considerably longer than Colonel Dane believes we have. A pause. Sergeant Voss, I'm going to ask you one question, and I need a truthful answer. Ask it. The 7 holdover dogs that were transferred to your unit over the past several months, the ones whose previous handlers are listed as medically discharged or KIA, were any of them part of the original Iron Pack unit? Elena looked at the ceiling for a moment. At the plain institutional ceiling of quarters she'd occupied for 14 months, the place she'd come back to every evening after training dogs in protocols that no one had authorized because she believed in something that the institution had tried to bury. All 7 of them, she said. The silence on the line lasted 4 full seconds. Someone sent them to you, Webb said. Not a question. Yes. Do you know who? Not yet, Elena said, but I'm going to find out. Another silence, shorter this time. Sergeant Voss, your confinement order will be reviewed by 800 tomorrow. I would ask that you remain available and that you keep this conversation between yourself and your physician. Webb paused. Webb, and Sergeant, what you did today in Warehouse 7, all 47 of them. Yes, ma'am. That required a level of trust, Webb said slowly, between a handler and her animals that our institution has been systematically undervaluing for 20 years. Today was, she stopped. Started again. Today will matter for a long time. The line went quiet. Elena set the phone down and sat in the dark for a while, not thinking exactly, more like letting things settle into their correct positions after a day that had shaken everything loose. 47 people. Iron Pack's dogs. Warren Solis and his 3 years of documented proof. Dane's face when he'd understood what she was implying. The 7 holdover dogs who had known ghost sweep without being taught it. Someone had been planning this. Not the fire was an accident of fuel lines and electrical faults and bad maintenance schedules. But someone had been placing pieces before the fire, arranging things so that when a moment came, whatever moment, wherever it arrived, Elena would have what she needed to survive it and to prove what needed to be proved. She didn't yet know who. She had a direction. She lay back on her bunk and listened to the bass settle into its nighttime sounds. And somewhere across the compound, Max barked once short, clear of the bark that in their private language meant, I see you. And she closed her eyes and said very quietly into the dark of her room, I see you too. Tomorrow was coming. She intended to be ready for it. She didn't sleep, not because she couldn't, her body had been through enough. That sleep should have been automatic, the kind that comes without asking after sustained physical stress. But her mind kept returning to the same point the way a tongue returns to a broken tooth, testing it, unable to leave it alone. All 7 of them. 7 holdover dogs transferred to her unit across 4 months through 7 separate administrative requests processed by 7 different people who didn't communicate with each other. The odds of that happening without deliberate coordination were not odds. They were impossibility wearing a bureaucratic costume. Someone had moved those dogs to her. Someone with access to military canine records, to Iron Pack's disbanded roster, to base transfer protocols, someone who had known exactly what she was building in that compound before she'd filed her first request. The question that kept her awake was not who. She had a direction on that, a shape beginning to form at the edges. The question that kept her awake was why now? Why this month, this base, this particular window of time? Dane's promotion recommendation? The Secretary of Defense's office. Last month, someone had known about that too. At 0340, she got up, sat at the small desk in her quarters, and wrote down everything she remembered about the 7 dogs, their names, their service histories, their previous handlers, every detail she'd read in the transfer documentation. She wrote it by hand on paper because she'd learned in Fallujah that digital records had owners and paper had witnesses, and sometimes that distinction mattered enormously. When she was done, she folded the paper twice and put it inside the lining of her left boot. Then she sat back and waited for morning to decide it had taken long enough. At 6:12, someone knocked on her door. Not the sound of an MP. Too informal, too quick. She opened it and found Captain Ferris standing in the hallway out of uniform civilian clothes, which on a base at 0612 meant he hadn't come through official channels and didn't want anyone to notice him doing it. "I have about 4 minutes," he said, "before anyone notices I'm not where I'm supposed to be." "Then talk fast," Elena said, and stepped back to let him in. He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room with the posture of a man who had rehearsed this conversation and was now discovering that rehearsal and reality are different things. "The JAG reviewed Solis's statement last night," he said. "All of it. The recording, the documentation he provided remotely, the corroborating records that Webb's office sent over." He paused. "Elena, the documentation it's substantial. The airstrike order, the falsified mission report, the Iron Pact disbandment paperwork, and who signed it. It's all there." "I know," she said. "What you don't know," Ferris stopped, ran a hand across his face. "Dane requested a meeting with the base JAG officer at 0530 this morning, before the JAG's office had formally contacted him about any investigation, before anyone told him about Solis's statement." Elena went still. "How did he know?" "That's the question." Ferris met her eyes. "He has a source somewhere in the IG process. Somebody who told him last night that a statement had been filed and documentation was in transit. He spent 3 hours trying to get access to Solis's medical file through the base hospital, wanting to establish cognitive impairment from the burn smoke inhalation affecting his mental state." Ferris's jaw tightened. The base physician on duty declined. Twice. "Priya," Elena said. "Lieutenant Nair told him that the patient's cognitive function was fully intact and that any attempt to access records without legal authorization would be formally documented." Something moved across Ferris's face that was close to admiration. She used those exact words. Formally documented. Dane left the hospital at 0215. Elena processed this. What does he do next? He files a counter-complaint. That's my best read. He argues that the Fallujah operation is still classified above the IG's authority, that Solis's account is compromised by his contractor status and his proximity to you today, and that the whole thing is a coordinated effort by a disgruntled former unit member to derail a legitimate promotion. Ferris spread his hands. "It's not a bad strategy. It buys him time, and time is what he needs right now." "How much time does Webb's office need?" "To process the documentation formally and escalate to a level above Dane's political cover." Ferris thought about it. 72 hours, maybe 90. "Then we need Solis to stay on this base for 72 hours, Elena said, "under medical observation with access to his documentation. He's already requested discharge from the medical bay. He wants to leave." Ferris paused. "He's frightened, Elena. He came here knowing this would happen. He didn't fully anticipate." Another pause, how fast Dane moves. Elena nodded slowly. She understood frightened. She also understood that Warren Solis had spent 3 years carrying something that was going to crush him if he put it down wrong. "I need to talk to him." "You're confined to quarters." "I know where I am, Captain." Ferris looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and set a single key card on her desk. "Base hospital, staff access." "My rounds start at 0800, he said. "I won't be in the medical wing before then." He looked at the key card, back at her. 4 minutes are up, he said, and walked out. She moved through the base in the specific way she'd learned to move when she needed to be somewhere without generating attention. Not fast, not furtive, the pace of someone with a destination and a reason for it. Head up, nothing to see here. The key card worked. The medical wing at 0630 had the particular quality of institutional mourning, the shift change energy, people focused on tasks and transitions, nobody looking at faces. Warren Solis was in a curtained bay near the east end of the ward. He was awake. He looked like a man who also hadn't slept and who was less surprised by his own condition than she might have expected. "I figured you'd come," he said. "Ferris told me you want to leave." "I do." He looked at his bandaged arms. I came here to find you, not to testify before a military tribunal. I have a life. I have a daughter in Portland. When I planned this, I thought—" He stopped. "I thought I'd hand off what I had and get clear before it escalated. It escalated faster than you planned. Significantly." He looked at her directly. "Dane knows I'm here. He's going to come after my contractor credentials first. Then my pension. Then he's going to start on my daughter's employer. She works for a defense contractor, federal adjacent, very easy to apply pressure to." He said it without self-pity, just the flat accounting of a man who knew exactly how this particular machine operated. "He's done it before. Do you know about Marcus Dell?" The name landed on Elena like cold water. Marcus Dell, Iron Pack's second handler, one who'd been closest to her in Fallujah, the one who'd been in the building when the airstrike was called. She'd been told he was killed in the blast. She'd believed it for 3 years. "What about Marcus Dell?" she said very carefully. Solis watched her face. "He survived," he said. "He was extracted from the building by a local civilian before the secondary blast. He was badly injured, spinal damage, partial paralysis. He spent 8 months in a military hospital in Germany under a name that wasn't his. When Dane found out he'd survived, Solis paused. He didn't order another airstrike. He was smarter than that by then. He had Dell's family contacted. Dell's brother runs a restaurant in Chicago. Dell's mother is 73, lives alone in Memphis. He was told very clearly that his continued survival and his family's continued welfare were connected to his continued silence." Elena sat down on the chair beside his bed, not because she needed to, because the alternative was standing while the world rearranged itself around her, and she didn't trust her legs to accommodate both things at once. "Marcus is alive," she said. "He's in San Diego," Solis said. "He's been in San Diego for 14 months. He knew you were at Pendleton. He was the one who arranged the dog transfers." The paper in her boot, the 7 names she'd written at 0340, the shape that had been forming at the edges of her thinking since Webb's call. Marcus Dell was alive. Marcus Dell had sent her the dogs. Marcus Dell had been 30 miles away for over a year, building this piece by piece, waiting for a moment that would create enough noise that the truth couldn't be buried under it again. The fire at Warehouse 7 had been that moment. He hadn't planned the fire, but he'd known that if he gave her the means and if she was given time, a moment would come. He'd trusted her to recognize it. She put both hands flat on her knees and took one breath. "Does Dane know Dell is alive?" she said. "He's known for 8 months, Solis said. He's had Dell under surveillance since then, which means he knows about the dog transfers, which means he knows exactly what today was," Elena said. "Not quite a question. He knows today was not an accident," Solis confirmed. "He knows you've been building something. He doesn't know the full scope of the documentation, but he knows enough to understand that the only way he survives this is if you don't." He looked at her steadily. "I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you are walking into. Not to frighten you. You don't seem particularly easy to frighten." "I've been frightened plenty," she said. "I just don't stop when I am." She looked at him. "Will you stay 72 hours? Medical observation documented with Priya as your attending physician. Webb's office needs the time." He was quiet for a long moment, a man calculating the cost of a decision against the cost of not making it. "My daughter's name is Claire," he said. "She's 26. If something happens to my contractor credentials, I'll make sure that's the first thing Webb's office addresses," Elena said, "before the formal investigation opens, before anything becomes public. Your family stays out of it." "Can you guarantee that?" "No," she said honestly, "but I can put it in front of the right people in the next 2 hours and make it their problem to guarantee. That's what I can do." Another silence. Longer. 72 hours, he said. "Thank you." She stood. "One more thing. Marcus Dell, I need his contact." Solis looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he told her a phone number from memory, the way a person recites something they've rehearsed against the possibility of exactly this moment. She memorized it without writing it down. "He's been waiting for you to call," Solis said. "He didn't reach out himself because he was afraid of what he'd put you through if it went wrong." "It's not going wrong," Elena said. She didn't say it to reassure him. She said it because it was true and she needed to hear herself say it out loud. She called the number from the east stairwell of the medical building on her personal phone at 0659. It rang twice. The voice that answered was one she had last heard in a building in Fallujah that had then been destroyed by an airstrike that was supposed to have killed her. It was rougher than she remembered and slower, and it carried in it the specific weight of 3 years of silence that had been chosen rather than given, which was its own kind of heavy. "Elena," Marcus Dell said. She couldn't speak for a moment. She hadn't expected that she'd expected to be fine, and she wasn't fine. She was standing in a stairwell with her hand pressed against the concrete wall, trying to get something loose from her throat. "You sent me Max," she finally said. "I sent you all 7. A pause. "I'm sorry it took so long. I needed to be sure you were somewhere stable before I started moving pieces." "You could have told me." "I know." His voice carried something that she recognized as its own kind of grief. "I was protecting you. Or I told myself that. Mostly I was afraid that if I contacted you and it went wrong again." He stopped. "I didn't know if I could survive doing that to you twice." She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "It's not going wrong," she said. Same words, same tone, same absolute certainty. "Solace is staying. Webb's office has the documentation. The footage from yesterday is already outside this base." She paused. "How soon can you get here?" "I'm 40 minutes out," he said, which meant he'd already been moving before she called, which meant he'd known she'd call this morning. "Dane has you under surveillance," she said. "He has someone watching my apartment," Marcus said. "I left through the building's utility access at 0530. Whoever he sent hadn't adjusted for that possibility, which tells me his surveillance budget is not what it used to be." A beat. "I go by Marcus Reyes now. DOD issued identity if Dane checks, and he will check. I need you on record," she said. "Not just Solace. You, firsthand in that building in Fallujah, what you saw before the blast and what happened after." "I know." The slowness in his voice was not reluctance. It was the measured pace of someone who has walked a long road to arrive at a single moment and intends to take it carefully. "I've been rehearsing it for 3 years. I'm ready." She gave him the JAG office address in Ferris's extension, and she told him to come in through the hospital entrance. Then she said something she hadn't said to anyone in a long time, because she'd lost the people she'd trusted enough to say it to, and finding one of them alive changed the geography of her entire world. "I'm glad you're not dead," she said. A silence. Then quietly, "I'm glad you didn't quit." She was back in her quarters by 0740, which was 20 minutes before Ferris had said his rounds would start, and she spent those 20 minutes on the phone with Director Webb. She gave her Marcus Dell's name, his current identity, his arrival timeline, and Solace's condition. She gave her Dane's 0530 JAG meeting and his hospital visit and his pattern of behavior, which Webb received with the focused attention of someone building a file that already had considerable material in it. Then she said, "I need Claire Solace protected, his daughter Portland, defense contractor employer, before anything goes public." "Already in process," Webb said, "since 0400. Elena let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Sergeant Voss," Webb said, "Colonel Dane has filed a formal obstruction complaint against you this morning. He's also filed paperwork to have your K9 unit placed under direct command authority, his office specifically pending the outcome of his counter-complaint. He can't do that without a formal review period. He's claiming exigent circumstances based on the unauthorized perimeter entry yesterday." A pause. "It won't hold, but it creates a 48-hour window during which he has provisional authority over your unit's placement and operations." Elena understood what that meant immediately. He's going to relocate the two. The order was filed at 0615, effective 1200 today. She looked at the clock on her wall. 4 hours and 16 minutes. "Can Webb's office issue a counterhold?" "Working on it," Webb said. "I need 1 more hour." 1 hour. Elena could work with 1 hour. She also knew that 1 hour was exactly the kind of window that a man like Dane could do significant damage in if he understood it was his last one. "He'll move faster than 1,200, she said, "if he knows the IG is moving." "I believe you're correct," Webb said. "Then the hour matters." "It does," Webb agreed. "Don't let him get to those dogs. Sergeant." She was out the door before the call ended. The compound was a 6-minute walk from her quarters. She did it in 4. The morning was warming up toward a day that would be clear and dry and entirely indifferent to the human drama happening beneath it. And as she came around the last corner, she could see the compound ahead, and she could see the MP vehicle parked outside it, and she could see Dane standing at the compound gate with 2 handlers she didn't recognize. Handlers she'd never seen on this base. He'd moved at 0800, not 1200. He'd moved the moment his paperwork was filed, before any counterhold could be issued, before anyone could formally intercept him, because he'd calculated the same window she had, and he'd started his clock earlier. Hector Meade was at the gate. She could see his posture from 50 yards, and she knew from the angle of his shoulders that he was refusing something calmly and with the specific stubbornness of a man who has decided where his line is. She started moving faster. "These animals are under Sergeant Voss's unit command," Hector was saying as she reached them. His voice was controlled and level, and his jaw was set in a way she'd only seen twice before. "Any transfer order requires her authorization or a signed order from the chain of command with JAG review." "I have a signed order," Dane said. He held up a document. "Effective immediately." "That order was filed 45 minutes ago," Elena said, arriving at Hector's shoulder. She was breathing harder than she wanted to be. "The review period on an exigent transfer is a minimum of 2 hours under base regulation 714. You know that, sir?" Dane turned to look at her. His expression was very controlled. "You are confined to quarters, Sergeant." "I'm standing here," she said. "Which one of those is more relevant right now?" The 2 unfamiliar handlers looked at each other. The MP near the vehicle had gotten out and was standing by his door, not moving, watching. "These animals are military assets," Dane said. "They will be transferred to the Eastern facility pending review of yesterday's unauthorized operation." "These animals saved 47 lives yesterday," Elena said, "under my command, without a single casualty. And you want to relocate them while an IG investigation into your conduct is actively processing." She held his gaze. "Sir, I'd like you to consider very carefully how that sequence of events will appear in documentation." Something cracked in Dane's expression. Not much, not visibly to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But she was looking for it, and she saw it the moment when a man realizes he's been outmaneuvered and has to decide whether to push forward anyway or find a way to retreat that doesn't look like retreat. Inside the compound, Max had come to the fence. He stood at the chain link, watching Dane with an attention that was neither aggressive nor uncertain. It was the attention of an animal that has assessed a situation and reached a conclusion and is waiting to see if the conclusion requires action. Dane looked at the dog looked at Dane. "This isn't over," Dane said. He said it to Elena, but she had the distinct impression that the statement was meant for something larger than either of them, a last assertion of authority over a situation that was escaping his control in real time. "No," she said, "it isn't." He turned and walked back to the MP vehicle without another word. The 2 unfamiliar handlers followed him, neither of them making eye contact with Elena or Hector. The vehicle pulled away. Hector let out a slow breath. "That's not going to be the end of it." "No," Elena said. "But Marcus Dell is 40 minutes out, and Webb's office has a counter hold in process, and Warren Solis is staying in that hospital for 72 hours. She looked at him. "How are the dogs?" Hector almost smiled. "Max has been at that fence since 0500. I think he was waiting for you." She looked at Max through the chain link. He pressed his nose against it. "I'm here," she said quietly. He was already looking past her east, as he always did, as if whatever he could read in that direction hadn't finished speaking yet. She followed his gaze. The sky over the eastern edge of the base was clear and sharp in the early morning light, the air still carrying the faint smell of yesterday's fire. Whatever was coming next was coming from that direction. She could feel it the same way Max felt it, not in details, not in specifics, but in the certainty that the sequence of events that had started in a burning warehouse had not yet reached its conclusion. It was coming, and this time she would be ready before it arrived. Marcus Dell arrived at 0847. Elena heard the vehicle before she saw it, a civilian rental, nothing that would register on a base manifest as significant. She was at the hospital entrance when he came through the door, moving with a cane on his left side. his right leg taking more weight than the left in the specific compensation pattern of someone who had rebuilt their mobility from something much worse and refused to let the remaining limitation define the whole picture. She had last seen him in a doorway in Fallujah, with fire behind him and a radio in his hand, and 28 dogs between them and the thing that was coming. She had believed for 3 years that the next image she had of him, the one burned into the back of her mind that she never went looking for, was the last true thing. The building going down, the silence after. He stopped when he saw her, 3 feet between them. His face was older, which was not a surprise. What surprised her was that it was also more settled, the face of a man who had survived something that should have killed him and arrived eventually at a kind of peace with the surviving, even if the peace had cost him considerably. "You look terrible," he said. "You look alive," she said. He laughed. It was short and rough and completely genuine, and it broke something open in her chest that she hadn't known was still sealed. She crossed the 3 feet and put her arms around him, and he put his free arm around her, and they stood there in the hospital entrance for a moment that had no operational value whatsoever and was entirely necessary. "I'm sorry," he said quietly into her shoulder. "For the 3 years, I'm sorry." "We'll do the accounting later," she said. "Right now, I need your testimony." He pulled back and looked at her with an expression that said he'd expected nothing different and was grateful for the familiarity of it. "Where's the JAG officer?" "Building C. Priya is with Solace. Webb's office is on the phone with the base commander's superior, and Dane tried to relocate the dogs an hour ago." She started moving and he fell into step beside her, the cane finding its rhythm. "I stopped it. He knows the window is closing." "He'll do something bigger than a dog transfer," Marcus said. "That was a probe. He was testing how much you had in place before he commits to a real move." "What's the real move?" "The classified shield," Marcus said. "It's the only thing he has left. He files to have the Fallujah operation classified above VIG authority on national security grounds. It's been done before, not often, but it's in the playbook. It creates a federal court review process that takes months and buries the documentation under a security review that nobody outside the DNI can touch." He paused. "He needs to file it before Webb's office formally opens the investigation. Once the investigation is open, the classification argument becomes substantially harder to make." "How long does he have?" "Webb's office formally opens at the moment she receives a signed escalation from a 2-star or above," Marcus said. "Do you know if she has that signature?" "She said she was working on it." "Working on it is not having it." He looked at her steadily. "Elena, if Dane files the classification shield in the next 2 hours, this gets complicated in ways that Solace's documentation alone cannot fix. I need to be on record before that happens." First-hand testimony from a direct participant overrides the classification argument because it shifts the legal framework from document access to witness protection. He paused at a door, "which is why I need to be in front of the JAG officer in the next 30 minutes. "Then stop explaining it to me and let's go," she said, and pushed the door open. Major Sandra Okafor, base JAG officer, was a woman who had the quality that the best lawyers share with the best surgeons, the ability to receive catastrophically complicated information without letting the complication alter the quality of her thinking. She had been at her desk since 0600. She had reviewed Solace's statement, Webb's preliminary file, the footage from the warehouse, and Dane's counter-complaint, and she had arrived at a set of conclusions that she kept carefully to herself until she understood who else in the room had arrived at them independently. When Marcus Dell sat down across from her desk and stated his full name, his former unit, his role in the Fallujah operation, and the reason he had been living under a different identity for 3 years, she listened without interrupting for 11 minutes. Then she asked 4 questions. The questions were precise and targeted, and Elena, sitting against the wall, recognized them as the 4 questions you ask when you already have the shape of something and you're verifying the edges. "Mr. Dell," Okafor said when his answers had confirmed what she needed to confirm, "I want to be direct with you about what I'm looking at. The documentation from Solace combined with your first-hand account establishes a prima facie case for wrongdoing that I'm not in a position to ignore. What I need from you now is written consent to include your testimony in a formal referral to the IG." She paused. "I also need to advise you that the moment this referral is filed, Colonel Dane will become aware of your presence on this base." "He's already aware," Marcus said. His surveillance on my San Diego apartment will have flagged my departure this morning within the hour. Then we have less time than I'd prefer. Okafor picked up her phone. I'm going to need you both to stay in this building while I make some calls. She looked at Elena. Your confinement order is still technically active, Sergeant. I'm aware, Elena said. How long for the calls? 40 minutes, maybe less. Then I'll be right here, Elena said and sat back down. The 40 minutes were the longest Elena had spent since the warehouse, and the warehouse had contained an active fire which gave her a baseline for what long felt like. She and Marcus sat in the JAG waiting area and talked the way people talk when they have a lifetime of conversation banked, and only a narrow window to spend it in fast compressed, covering the essential things. He told her about Germany, the hospital, the months that bled together, the spinal surgery that had taken 6 hours and delivered results that the surgeon described as better than expected, and Marcus described as sufficient. He told her about the identity transfer which had been arranged not by Dane's people, but by someone inside the DOD who had decided quietly and without authorization that Marcus Dell's survival was worth protecting, even if his official existence wasn't. He didn't know who. He'd never been told. He'd been handed a name and a history and a set of documents and told to disappear into them until it was time to come back. Who told you it was time? Elena asked. Webb, Marcus said. 6 months ago, she made contact through an intermediary. She told me Dane's promotion was in process and asked if I was in a condition to participate in what she called a formal resolution. He paused. I told her I needed to set up the dog transfers first. She gave me 90 days. Elena stared at him. Webb knew about the transfers. Webb has been building this for 2 years, Marcus said. Solis was her source inside the contractor network. I was her primary witness. The documentation Solis carried was assembled with guidance from her office through channels Dane's people couldn't track. He met her eyes. You were the operational component, the part that required a crisis to activate. Webb couldn't create the crisis. She could only ensure that when it came, you had what you needed to respond to it. The shape of the thing finished forming in Elena's mind. All of it, the dog transfers Solis at the base. Webb's call the previous evening, the 72-hour ask. Not improvised, not reactive. Planned over 2 years by a woman at the IG's office who had understood that the only way to break a man like Dane was to give him a moment in which his corruption and his institutional protection failed simultaneously in front of witnesses and cameras that couldn't be managed after the fact. Yesterday's fire had not been the trigger. Yesterday's fire had been the verification. The proof that the pieces Webb had assembled would hold under real pressure. The 47 people in that warehouse had not been part of the plan, but the proof that Elena would respond the way she'd responded, that had been exactly what Webb had been waiting for. She used us, Elena said. Not in anger, in the flat tone of someone arriving at a fact and deciding what to do with it. She used what we were already doing, Marcus said carefully. There's a difference. He paused. If it had been any other day, no fire, no crisis, this would have been a documentation filing and a counter-complaint in a legal process that Dane's political network might have survived. The footage of 29 dogs running into a burning building and pulling 47 people out of it changed the weight of what we're saying. It made the truth visible in a way that legal documents alone never could. He looked at her. Webb knew that if she gave you the right tools and enough time, the moment would create itself. She was right. Elena was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I'm angry at that. You don't have to decide right now, Marcus said. No, she agreed. Right now I need Okafor to finish her calls. As if on cue, Okafor's door opened. Sorry. The expression on Okafor's face was one Elena read, in under a second, the expression of someone who has just been told something that reorganizes the landscape significantly and is managing the reorganization with professional efficiency. Webb has the 2-star signature, Okafor said. The formal investigation opened 4 minutes ago. She looked at Marcus. Mr. Dell, your testimony is now protected under witness statute. Colonel Dane cannot legally compel your departure from this installation or take any action against you or your affiliated persons while the investigation is active. She paused. I'm also advised that the classification shield filing Dane submitted 20 minutes ago has been received and will be reviewed, but that the formal investigation takes precedence pending the court's determination. He filed it, Elena said. Maman. 20 minutes ago, which means he knew the investigation was coming before it opened. Okafor's voice carried a precise neutrality. That timing will itself be part of the investigation's scope. Marcus exhaled slowly. What happens to him now? Colonel Dane has been notified that he is the subject of a formal IG investigation and that he is suspended from command authority pending its resolution. The base executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel Park, assumes command effective immediately. Okafor looked at Elena. Your confinement order is rescinded. Your K-9 unit's operational status is restored. The provisional transfer authority Dane filed this morning is void. She paused once more with the timing of someone who has saved the most significant piece for last. Director Webb's office has also requested that you report to the Base Communications Center at 10:30 this morning. She wants to brief you directly. On what? Elena said. She said Okafor replied with the faint expression of someone quoting something they found remarkable, that she wants to talk about the future of Iron Pack. Elena stopped at the compound first. She needed 10 minutes and she took them because some things couldn't wait for operational briefings and political resolutions and the machinery of justice grinding into motion. She went through the gate and crossed to where Max was waiting. He was always waiting. That was the thing about him. He was always exactly where you needed him to be before you'd known you needed him there. And she crouched down to his level and put both hands on either side of his face. He looked at her with those amber eyes that had seen Fallujah in a burning warehouse and 3 years of training sessions at dawn when nobody was watching, and the compound at night when she couldn't sleep and came out to sit with him because the alternative was sitting alone. It's moving, she told him. It's actually moving. He leaned into her hands. I know you don't understand what that means in the way I mean it, she said, but you understand something. You always understand something. She paused. I think you have understood all of it from the beginning, and I just didn't know how to ask. Hector appeared at her elbow with the quiet tact of a man who had learned when to approach and when to stay back. Webb's office called the compound directly, he said. Formal reinstatement order came through at 0923. All 29 dogs are cleared for full operational status. I heard, Elena said. She stood up slowly. There's something else. Hector's voice shifted, carrying the particular quality of someone delivering information they're not sure how to frame. The footage. It's everywhere, Elena. I mean everywhere. The news helicopter footage from yesterday, the security camera compilation someone posted at 200 this morning, it's been viewed 40 million times in 12 hours, he paused. The clip of the kids coming up the stairs with their hands on Max's back. That one alone is at 23 million. She didn't know what to say to that number, so she said nothing. She looked at Max. Max looked back at her with the profound equanimity of an animal that was not checking social media and was entirely at peace with this. The 4 kids did an interview, Hector continued, with a reporter outside the base hospital this morning. The 7-year-old girl, the one Max stopped at for on the stairs, she said, he stopped, cleared his throat. She said the dog looked at her like he already knew her name. Elena turned away for a moment, not because she was crying, because she needed 1 second in which no one was watching her face. Okay, she said when the second was done. She turned back. Make sure all 29 are fed fully checked and documented for health status. I want a complete record of their condition as of this morning. Official dated with your signature. She paused. We're going to need that record. For the investigation. For what comes after, she said.
Guitar.
The communications center at 10:30 was quiet, just Elena and Priya and Marcus, and a video connection to Webb's office in Washington, where it was mid-afternoon and Webb looked like a woman who had not slept and had no particular intention of sleeping until the thing she'd been working toward for 2 years was fully irreversibly in motion. Let me tell you what we're looking at, Webb said without preamble, which Elena had come to understand was her preferred mode of communication and was one of the reasons she trusted her. Colonel Dane will face a general court-martial. The classification shield filing will fail. His own act of filing it before the investigation opened has created an obstruction problem that supersedes the classification argument. The Fallujah airstrike documentation, Solis's account, and Dell's testimony together constitute a record that the DoD cannot ethically manage by suppression. She paused. The promotion recommendation has been withdrawn. No one in the room said anything for a moment. Beyond Dane, Webb continued. The investigation scope includes the Iron Pack disbandment process, the falsified medical discharges, the pressure applied to surviving unit members, and the chain of authorization that allowed a man to reach colonel with this in his record. She let that sit. That investigation will take time. It won't be clean. There are other people involved, and some of them are in positions that will make this uncomfortable for everyone in that room and in this office. She looked directly at the camera. I want you to understand that going in. I've understood that from the beginning, Elena said. I know. Webb's expression shifted slightly from operational to something closer to personal. I owe you a direct conversation about the way this was structured, about the role I asked you to play without fully informing you that you were playing it. You used the pieces you had, Elena said. I'm one of the pieces. You are significantly more than a piece, Webb said. You are the reason 47 people are alive today. You are the reason 29 dogs, who should have been scattered across retirement facilities and breeding programs, spent the last 11 months becoming something the military didn't know it had. She paused. I made decisions about how to use what you'd built without your consent. I would make the same decisions again because I believe they were correct, and I believe you deserve to know that I know the difference between those two things. Elena looked at her through the screen for a long moment. Dane's source in your office, she said, the one who tipped him about Solis's statement at 0530. Webb didn't flinch. Being addressed, it was a contractor-level administrative position, not core staff. That person was removed from access at 700 this morning. Removed or investigated? Both, Webb said flatly. I don't run a clean operation by looking the other way at the parts that are inconvenient. Good, Elena said. Then we understand each other. Marcus, sitting to her left, made a sound that was almost a laugh. Priya, to her right, was writing something in the small notebook she carried everywhere, the kind of meticulous record-keeping that was both medical habit and Elena had come to understand a form of protection against a world that revised its memories to suit its interests. The other matter, Webb said, Iron Pack, formally. She looked at her notes, then back at the camera. The Secretary of Defense has reviewed the Pendleton footage and the preliminary operational report from yesterday's incident. He's asked two questions. First, how did 29 dogs with no formal joint unit designation conduct a coordinated extraction that exceeded the performance parameters of any trained unit we currently have on record? Second, why don't we have more of them? A pause. I've been asked to develop a program framework. I've been given a budget authorization, and I've been asked to recommend a program lead. She looked at Elena. I'm recommending you. The room was very quiet. Not a desk role, Webb added, reading something in Elena's expression accurate tone. Field architect, you design the program, train the trainers, establish the doctrine, and maintain operational oversight of the pilot units. You report to my office, not to a base commander. She paused. The 7 holdover dogs in the case you've trained at Pendleton become the founding unit. The program's official name would be your decision. Elena didn't answer immediately. She sat with it the way she sat with decisions that required her whole self instead of just her professional competence, feeling the weight of it, the shape of it, what it would require and what it would return. She thought about Iron Pack, about a unit the military had tried to bury because it had seen something it wasn't supposed to see. About 7 dogs scattered into the system like evidence hidden in plain sight, waiting for a handler who would know what she was looking at. About Marcus, 3 years in a borrowed identity, moving pieces on a board from a distance because it was the only way to move them safely. About 29 dogs who had turned toward a fire instead of away from it, not because they'd been commanded, but because they'd understood in whatever language animals understand the things that matter, that the direction of the fire was the direction of the answer. Iron Pack, she said. That's the name. Then Iron Pack it is, Webb said. Dane was escorted from his office at 12:15 by 2 officers from the IG's field team who had driven up from San Diego that morning. Elena didn't watch it happen. She heard about it from Ferris, who told her with the compressed, careful tone of a man who had worked for Richard Dane for 2 years and was still processing what that meant about his own judgment. He didn't say anything, Ferris said. Not one word. Just picked up the framed photo from his desk, his daughter's graduation photo, and walked out. Elena didn't respond to that. She didn't know what to do with the humanity of that image, a man who had ordered an airstrike on civilians and spent 3 years destroying the people who'd witnessed it, picking up his daughter's photo on the way out. She filed it in the place where she kept things she didn't have a framework for yet. "Ferris," she said, "what do you do next?" He looked at her with genuine uncertainty. "I don't know. I followed orders I should have questioned. I enforced a confinement on a soldier who was doing the right thing." He stopped. "I don't know if that's forgivable." "It's not about forgiveness," Elena said. "It's about what you do with the knowledge. You know the difference now. The question is whether you act differently when it matters." She looked at him steadily. "You hesitated yesterday, when he gave the order in the command center. You hesitated before you complied." "That's not enough," he said. "It's a start," she said. "Most people don't even get there." He was quiet for a moment. Then the footage of the NAS, what they did in that building, I've watched it 12 times. I don't have a framework for what I'm seeing. "I know," Elena said. "I'm going to spend the next several years building one." She paused. "When I do, I'll need people around me who ask hard questions before they comply. If you're interested." He looked at her. She meant it, and he understood that she meant it. And something shifted in his posture. Not relief, it's Callan. More like the feeling of a person who has been carrying shame, looking up and finding that the road ahead is not closed. "I'm interested," he said. At 1600, the 7-year-old girl's mother brought her back to the compound. She'd asked the hospital to arrange it. The girl's name was Sophie, and she walked through the compound gate holding her mother's hand with the specific dignity of a child who has been through something significant and is still deciding what it means. She found Max without guidance. He was where he always was, at the fence edge, watching, reading the picture. She walked up to him, and he turned to look at her, and his tail moved slowly once. She put her hand flat on his head, the way Elena had shown her mother to show her. "Hi," Sophie said. "I told everybody about you. I told them you stopped when I stopped. I told them you waited." She paused. "My mom said dogs don't understand what we say, but I think you understood." Max was perfectly still under her hand. "Thank you for waiting," she said. Elena, standing 10 feet away, did not look at anyone in the compound. She looked at the eastern fence line, at the clear sky above it, at the place where a column of fire had stood yesterday and was now only a memory and a permanent entry in a record that would not be altered or buried or classified above anyone's authority. Priya appeared at her shoulder. "Webb's office confirmed. The formal investigation announcement goes public at 1800. "Good," Elena said. "Marcus is giving his first official statement to the JAG team at 1700. Priya paused. "How are you?" It was a question Elena was not used to answering honestly, and she wasn't sure she was going to start now. And then she thought about the 4 months of pre-dawn training sessions, and the 7 dog transfers, and the 3 years of proof she couldn't use, and the 47 people who were home tonight instead of not. And she said, "I'm the right side of tired, which is different from the wrong side." Priya smiled. "That's very specific." "It's an accurate description." Max finished with Sophie and padded back to Elena's side, pressing his flank against her leg with the steady weight of a large animal offering something that had no name in any training protocol she'd written. She put her hand on his back without looking down. "We did good," she said quietly. To him, to Priya, to the compound, to the version of herself that had arrived at Pendleton 14 months ago, carrying a file that said liability and a certainty that she knew what she was doing even when no one was watching. Max pressed harder against her leg. She left her hand where it was. Tomorrow the real work would start: testimony documentation, the long process of building something from the evidence of what 29 dogs had proven was possible. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight she stood in the compound with her hand on a 9-year-old Belgian Malinois who had survived Fallujah in a burning warehouse, and 3 years of being the only living proof of something that mattered, and she let the day settle into its proper place. The 47 were home. Iron Pack was coming back. And somewhere in Washington, a promotion recommendation sat in a shredder, and the truth was finally moving faster than the people trying to stop it. The public announcement hit at 1800 exactly the way Webb had said it would, and by 1900 it had consumed every major news cycle in the country with the specific velocity of a story that contains too many true things to be manageable. Elena watched none of it. She was in the compound, with the dogs running a quiet check on each one physical condition, behavioral state, the individual assessment she did at the end of every operational day because the dogs couldn't tell her if something was wrong, and she'd long ago decided that her job was to notice before they had to find a way to communicate it. 29 checks. She did them in order the way she always did Max last, because Max was always the last thing she did before she considered a day finished. Hector sat on the training bench with his phone face down on the wood beside him, which was his way of saying he'd looked at the news and decided that what was in front of him was more important than what was on a screen. "They're using the word unprecedented," he said, "about the dogs, every outlet." "It's not unprecedented," Elena said, moving her hands along the flank of a 4-year-old shepherd named Rook, checking his breathing, his muscle tension, the small signals. "It's just undocumented. That's going to be a distinction you'll have to explain a lot in the next few months." "I know." She moved to the next dog. "I'm good at explaining things." Hector almost smiled. The base XO Colonel Park called the compound at 17:30. He wanted to know if the unit needed anything. "Food, medical supplies, additional staffing." He paused. "I told him we needed the fence on the east side repaired. It's been bent since February." "What did he say?" "He said it would be done by morning." Hector looked at his hands. 14 months we've been asking for that fence. 14 months. Elena didn't say anything to that. She continued down the line. Marcus was still in the JAG building when she finished. She found him in the hallway outside Okafor's office, sitting on a bench with his cane across his knees, his head back against the wall, eyes closed, not sleeping, she could tell from his breathing, just resting inside the specific exhaustion of a person who has spent years carrying something and has just set it down. She sat beside him without speaking. They stayed like that for a while, the kind of silence that only works between people who have been through something together and don't need to perform recovery for each other. "The full statement took 4 hours, he said eventually. "I know. Okafor told me." She asked good questions. He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling, the kind that make you understand that someone has already done serious work before you walked in the room. He paused. "She asked me about the chain of authorization. Not just Dane, who approved the airstrike above him. Who knew the mission report was falsified? How high the knowledge went?" Elena turned to look at him. "What did you tell her? Everything I know, which is not everything there is." He met her eyes. "There's someone above Dane in this, Elena. Not directly involved in the Fallujah decision. I don't think he had operational awareness, but aware of the cover-up afterward. Aware and cooperative with it." He paused. "I have a name. I gave it to Okafor." "Who?" he told her. She sat with it. The name was not one she'd expected, which meant the investigation was going to go further than even Webb had publicly indicated, which meant the next several months were going to be significantly more complicated than the word investigation usually implied. "Does Webb know?" she said. "She will in about 20 minutes, Marcus said. "Okafor is calling her now. Are you prepared for what that means, for your situation, your identity, your—" "I've been prepared for 3 years, Marcus said. "I've been ready to come back to my own name since the day I got a borrowed one." He looked at her steadily. "Marcus Reyes goes back to wherever borrowed names go. Marcus Dell gives testimony in a federal proceeding and then goes to Chicago to have dinner with his brother, who doesn't know he's coming and is going to lose his mind when he opens the door." He paused. "I'd like to do that before anything else changes again." "You'll be able to do that," she said. "I'll make sure of it." "I know you will," he said simply. The certainty in it was not flattery. It was the assessment of a person who had watched her run into a burning building because 47 people needed someone to run toward them instead of away. Webb called Elena directly at 2015. The conversation lasted 22 minutes and covered things that Elena would be required to keep confidential for a period that Webb described as operationally necessary and Elena understood as politically delicate. The name Marcus had given Okafor had reached Webb's desk at 1947 and had produced by Webb's own description a moment of very controlled professional alarm. "The investigation's scope is expanding," Webb said, "significantly. I want you to understand that this is going to require patience from you in a way that yesterday's situation did not." "Yesterday's situation required me to run into a fire," Elena said. "This will require you to sit still while other people run into the fire," Webb said. which I'm aware is harder for you. Elena almost laughed. What do you need from me? Your formal cooperation as a witness, your documentation of the Iron Pact disbandment as you experienced it, and your continued operational presence at Pendleton while we establish the program framework. Webb paused. I also need something else. Something I'm asking rather than requiring. Ask it. The footage of yesterday, the dogs, the warehouse, all of it is going to continue to be the public face of this story for weeks, possibly months. The narrative around it will be managed by people with interests that may not align with yours or mine or the truth. Webb's voice was careful. I'd like you to speak, on record publicly, about what Iron Pack is and what it was and what it did in Fallujah and what 29 dogs did in a burning warehouse yesterday. Not a statement written by a public affairs office. Your words. The line was quiet for a moment. I've been quiet for 3 years, Elena said. I know. I was quiet because I had no proof and no one who would listen in a system that was very effective at making sure both of those things stayed true. I know that too, Webb said. The system has changed today. Not entirely, not permanently. Systems don't change that cleanly. But enough. Enough that your voice is no longer something that can be managed into silence. Elena looked out the window of her quarters at the dark compound, at the shapes of 29 dogs settled for the night at the eastern fence line where the sky was clear and the fire of yesterday was completely gone, except in the record. I'll speak, she said, on my terms. On your terms, Webb confirmed. Toi. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, but the thing Elena hadn't anticipated, because she was better at preparing for crises than for the absence of them, was what the 3 weeks themselves would feel like. They felt like building. Not rebuilding, which implies restoration of a previous state. Building which is different, which requires you to figure out what the foundation is before you put anything on top of it. She worked the dogs every morning. The full 29, the full joint unit training she'd been running quietly for 11 months, now made official, documented, observed by 3 separate teams from Webb's office and the DoD Animal Research Division, who arrived at the compound with notebooks and cameras and the expressions of people who had watched 40 million views of footage and were trying to understand what they were actually looking at. She let them watch. She answered their questions honestly and precisely. She did not perform for them. She ran the training the way she always ran it because Max and the others didn't care about external observation, and she'd long ago adopted the same standard. Marcus came back 8 days after the hearing announcement. Not to the base to San Diego, to his real name, to his brother's restaurant, where the reunion was, by Marcus's account, loud and prolonged and involved a quantity of food that he characterized as medically irresponsible and entirely worth it. He sent her a photo, him and his brother at a table, both of them grinning, a plate of something enormous between them. She kept the photo on her desk next to the paper with the 7 dog names. Warren Sullis was discharged from the hospital on day 4, cleared medically, and flew back to Portland, where his daughter Claire met him at the airport. Priya told Elena this. Elena was glad in a way that was simple and complete, no complication, no asterisk. Ferris was reassigned to Webb's office as a liaison, pending a formal review of his conduct during the Pendleton incident. Elena had written a character statement for him, not because she owed him one, because it was accurate, and accuracy mattered more than the satisfaction of withholding it. The twist that Elena had not seen coming arrived 11 days before the hearing, and it arrived in the form of a phone call from a number with a Fort Bragg prefix. She answered it expecting Webb's team. She got a woman's voice she didn't recognize, steady and direct, with the specific cadence of someone who has been in the field long enough that efficiency has become their natural register. Sergeant Voss, my name is Sergeant First Class Diana Reeves. I'm calling from the 75th Ranger Regiment, Fort Bragg. A pause. I saw the footage from Pendleton. All of it. Another pause, this one carrying something heavier. I have 3 dogs. They do what your dogs did in that warehouse. I've been running them informally for 2 years, and my command thinks I'm running a standard MWD unit. She stopped. I didn't know there was a name for what I was doing until 3 days ago. Elena sat down slowly. What did you call it? I didn't call it anything, Reeves said. I just knew it worked. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Open them. How did you train them? I figured most of it out on my own. But about 18 months ago, one of the dogs I received a Malinois named Scout. He already knew things I hadn't taught him. Responses I'd never seen in any training protocol. I couldn't explain it. Her voice shifted slightly the way voices shift when someone is finally saying something they've been keeping contained. I think Scout was in Iron Pack. I think he knew someone who trained with you. The paper in Elena's boot. The 7 names. She'd known the 7 holdover dogs sent to Pendleton, but Iron Pack had been larger than 7. It had been 28 dogs and multiple handlers at its peak, and the disbandment order had scattered all of them, and she had spent 3 years assuming scattered meant gone. Scout, Elena said carefully. What does he look like? Reeves described him. Elena knew before she finished. Scout had been Iron Pack's number 3. She had trained him herself from 8 weeks, and she had handed him to a handler named Keating, who had been listed as medically discharged in the disbandment paperwork and who she had believed was living quietly somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. How did you get him? Elena said. He was transferred to my unit 14 months ago, Reeves said, through 7 separate administrative requests processed by different administrators who didn't communicate with each other. The room went very quiet around Elena. The same pattern, different base, different handler, different vehicle, but the same architecture. The same careful invisible hand moving pieces through a system that was too large and too bureaucratic to notice the pattern if you spread it far enough. Webb had told her the Pendleton transfers were set up by Marcus, but Marcus had told her he'd arranged 7 dogs. He hadn't said anything about Fort Bragg. Sergeant Reeves, Elena said, how many handlers have called you in the past 11 days? A pause. You're the 4th person to ask me that question, Reeves said, which means you already know the answer is more than 1. How many? 7, Reeves said. 7 handlers, 12 bases across 4 branches. All of us running informal, multi-dog units that our commands don't fully understand. All of us with at least 1 dog. We couldn't entirely account for trained in things we hadn't taught. She paused. All of us saw Pendleton and understood what we were looking at. Elena stood up and walked to the window. Outside the compound was running its afternoon rotation, Hector working the younger dogs, the 7 holdovers, watching from the shade with the patient attention of animals who had been through more than their files said and knew the value of stillness. Iron Pack hadn't scattered. Iron Pack had replicated. Someone, not just Marcus, not just Webb, someone with a longer timeline and a broader reach than either of them had revealed, had been seeding handlers and dogs into the system for years, building what the institution had tried to destroy in the only way that couldn't be stopped. 1 dog, 1 handler, 1 informal unit at a time in bases spread far enough apart that no one base commander could see the whole picture. Who set up your transfers? Elena said. Her voice was completely level, and she was aware that it was the calmest she'd sounded in 3 weeks, which was because she'd gone somewhere beyond surprise into a clarity that felt like the moment before a very large thing becomes visible. I don't know, Reeves had said. I've been trying to find out for 11 days. A pause. But Scout knows things that only come from someone who loved him first, and whoever loved him first trained him to find his way back. She called Webb at 2100. You knew, Elena said, not an accusation, a statement of fact presented for confirmation. Webb was quiet for 4 seconds. I knew the Pendleton piece, she said. Marcus and I designed that together. The other units, she paused, and it was the first time in all of their conversations that Elena had heard Webb arrive at the edge of something she didn't fully control. The other units are not mine. I've been aware of them for approximately 9 days. I have not yet identified who organized them. 12 bases, Elena said. 7 handlers. Dogs with Iron Pack training that predate anything Marcus could have arranged. Yes, Webb said quietly. Someone else has been doing this longer than you have, Elena said. Someone who knew about Iron Pack before you did, who understood what it was and what it could become and started protecting it before the disbandment order was even filed. That appears to be correct, Webb said. And that person, whoever they are, has just created the single most significant argument for the Iron Pack program that I could not have manufactured through 2 years of legal and institutional work. She paused. 12 bases, Sergeant. 12 informal units operating independently with 0 coordination, achieving results that our formal program has never come close to. The argument writes itself. Elena thought about that. about someone patient enough to move pieces for years before the board was ready, about Iron Pack's dogs scattered into a system too large to notice the pattern, waiting in bases across the country for a signal that had finally come in the form of 40 million people watching 29 dogs run into a burning building. I want to find them, Elena said. Whoever did this. I know you do, Webb said. I want to find them first, which is a different priority. A pause. Work with the 7 handlers. Bring them to Pendleton. Build the program from what already exists instead of from what we plan. The foundation is larger than either of us knew. Another pause shorter. And Sergeant, be careful. Someone with this kind of reach, this kind of patience, is either the best ally we have or the most complicated one. I don't yet know which. Neither do I, Elena said, but I know how to find out. How did I asked the mom, she said. Webb laughed. It was a real laugh, brief and surprised, the laugh of a woman who had spent 2 years on a serious mission and had just been reminded that the most honest assessments sometimes come from the most unexpected directions. The hearing came and went the way important things often do, with more paperwork and less drama than the preceding events had implied, and with consequences that would take months to fully resolve. Dane's court-martial was scheduled. The name Marcus had given Okafor generated its own separate proceeding that Elena was not privy to and did not ask about, because Webb had asked her to trust the process, and she had decided after a consideration that Webb had earned that trust. She spoke at the hearing on day 23. Her own words, as Webb had promised. She talked about Iron Pack, what it had been, what it had done in Fallujah, what had been done to it afterward. She talked about 29 dogs turning toward a fire and what that required from them and what it meant. She talked about what the partnership between a handler and a dog actually was: not ownership, not command and compliance, but something that the military had no official word for, and that she'd spent 8 years trying to articulate and had finally stopped trying to put in language and just let be what it was. The panel asked questions for 2 hours. She answered every one. When it was over, she walked out of the hearing room and found Marcus in the hallway, leaning on his cane, his face carrying the expression of someone who has been present for the conclusion of something long and difficult and is sitting with the particular quiet that follows it. How did it go? He said. I said, what was true, she said. It went accordingly. He nodded. They walked out together into the afternoon, into the clear California air that smelled like nothing in particular and everything that had happened in the last 23 days. Fort Bragg called again, she said. Reeves and 2 of the other handlers are coming to Pendleton next week. The program is already running, Marcus said. You know that. You don't need a hearing or a budget authorization or a program framework. It's already running in 12 bases because someone built it that way. I need it to run officially, Elena said, so it can't be buried again. That's different from running. That's the part that matters, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then what do you need from me? Come to Pendleton, she said. Not as a witness, as a handler. Iron Pack needs people who remember what it was, not just people learning what it's becoming. He looked at her, at the cane, at his left leg. I'm not exactly field work ready. The dogs don't care about the cane, she said. You know that. A silence. Then something moved across his face that was the closest thing to relief she'd ever seen on it. Yeah, he said quietly. I know that. So, that evening she stood in the compound. At the time she always stood there. The light going amber. The bass settling into its night sounds, the 29 dogs doing what they did. At the end of every day reading the picture. Reading the air. Reading whatever it was they read that she'd spent years learning to trust and still couldn't fully explain. Max was at her side. He pressed his flank against her leg, steady and certain, the same weight he had offered her every evening for 7 months, in every operational day, in every difficult night, in every morning when she'd come out before dawn, because the alternative was staying inside with her own thoughts. Sophie's words from the week before were still with her. I told them you stopped when I stopped. I told them you waited. A 9-year-old girl in a burning sub-level smoke in her lungs and darkness around her and nothing to hold on to, and Max had stopped. Had waited. Had understood. In whatever way he understood the things that mattered, that the most important thing in that moment was not speed, was not extraction, was not the operational goal, was presence, was the simple, non-negotiable refusal to leave. Elena put her hand on his head. He leaned into it. "Good work," she said. "All of it. Every day. Good work." He was already looking east again, always east, always reading, always ahead of her by exactly the margin she needed to keep trusting him. Hector came to stand beside her. Priya, a moment later, Ferris, back from San Diego for the week, stood at a respectful distance until Elena turned and nodded at him, and then he came closer. 4 people in a compound with 29 dogs watching the last light go. None of them speaking, because what had happened in the last 23 days had a weight that didn't need narration. Somewhere in 12 bases across the country, 7 handlers were getting ready to come to Pendleton. Somewhere in Chicago, Marcus Dell was sleeping in his own name for the first time in 3 years. Somewhere in Portland, Warren Solis was sitting at dinner with his daughter Claire, and the conversation he'd been afraid to have had already started, and it was going better than he'd feared. And somewhere out there, patient, invisible, watching the board, was the person who had spent years moving dogs through a system that tried to forget them, seeding something into the institution that couldn't be killed with an order, or buried with a falsified report, or scattered by a disbandment directive. Someone who had understood long before the fire at Camp Pendleton, long before the footage, long before 40 million views in congressional hearings and IG investigations, that the truth about what a dog and a handler could do together was too important to exist in only one place. Elena didn't know who that person was yet. She intended to find out, but she also understood, standing in that compound with Max's weight against her leg, in the eastern sky going dark and clean above the fence line, that it didn't change what was already true. Iron Pack was real. Iron Pack had survived. Iron Pack had run into a burning building without a command because the dogs had understood what needed to happen before any human in that situation had been able to issue an order. And 29 animals who couldn't explain themselves in any language the institution recognized had proved in the most undeniable way possible that the partnership the institution had tried to bury was not only alive, but irreplaceable. Some things could not be disbanded. Some things could only be driven underground, where they grew stronger in the dark until the moment came when something lit them into plain sight for everyone to see. Max barked once, sharp, clean, carrying across the compound and beyond the fence and into the California evening. The other 28 answered, and across the country in 12 bases from Fort Bragg to Joint Base Lewis McChord, dogs that had been waiting for a signal they couldn't name lifted their heads and listened and knew, in the deep, certain way of animals that understand things humans are still learning to articulate, that the pack had called and the answer had come back, and nothing that had been broken was going to stay that way. Iron Pack was home, and it was never going to disappear again.